discovery at the forefront of the knowledge. And let me introduce the guests. We have administration. We have Dr. Patterson here. He's right here. So yes. Okay. So today's lecture is going to be about the real science that goes from people who do research. They dig up the bones, try to figure out things. So, and it's not just about dinosaurs, but also about dinosaur relatives. So that is very exciting. Let me introduce the speaker. Dr. Martz is here. He is from University of Houston downtown. Just a few words. Dr. Martz was born in Denver, Colorado. Grew up primarily in the Denver and Salida regions of Colorado. He began his studies in paleontology as an intern at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science while still attending high school, and worked at Ashfall Fossil Beds in Nebraska in 1994 before attending Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And he's done quite a bit of research, primarily most in northern Colorado, right? That's okay.
And also Arizona.
And also Arizona. So of course, Dr. Martz will tell all about his research in his talk. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martz, and he's going to present his very exciting lecture on dinosaur relatives.
Everyone can hear me? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you today about a relatively new discovery that we made in Colorado. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of dinosaur paleontology in Colorado, because Colorado figures very prominently in the history of the study of dinosaurs. This is the town of Morrison, which is maybe about an hour or so drive west of Denver. And it's basically tucked up right against the front range of the Rocky Mountains. And in this area, where the Rocky Mountains have basically been pushed up over the past 50, 60 million years, a number of rocks from the age of dinosaurs have been pushed up to the surface. And one of these rock units is what is referred to as the Morrison Formation. And this is a very interesting unit because this is actually one of the first areas in the world where we began to find fossils of dinosaurs and began to develop an understanding of what strange and beautiful animals dinosaurs really were. The story kind of begins with this guy. This is Arthur Lakes. He was a geology professor at the Colorado School of Mines. And in 1876, he discovered dinosaur bones basically coming out of the rocks near the town of Morrison. And he was very excited. Peabody Museum in Connecticut named Othniel Charles Marsh. And Marsh was a very, very famous paleontologist. He studied prehistoric mammals and other types of prehistoric animals. But he was kind of locked into this bitter rivalry with another paleontologist named Edward Drinker Cope, who worked in Philadelphia. And these two very famously just hated each other. There's a number of stories about how the rivalry began. One was that Cope had put together the skeleton of a swimming reptile called a plesiosaur. It's one of those long-necked swimming reptiles. And he put the head on what he thought was the neck, and Marsh pointed out that was actually the tail. So Cope was totally embarrassed by that. But Cope also got wind of these discoveries in Colorado, both at Morrison and also at a town in southern Colorado called Canyon City. And they also learned of some additional discoveries in Wyoming. And they sent these numerous expeditions out into the western United States to collect these dinosaur fossils. And they brought back literally hundreds of tons of dinosaur bones over the next several years. And this fantastic collecting was basically driven by their burning hatred of each other and desire to name more dinosaurs than the other guy. But the science really benefited from this because prior to this, we didn't really have a good idea of what dinosaurs really look like. Dinosaurs had previously just been known from very fragmentary bones, mostly known from Europe and the eastern United States, and people could tell that they were some kind of big reptile, but they didn't really have any idea of just how strange dinosaurs looked. They thought they were basically sort of like big lizards. But because of the work of Cope and Marsh, for the first time, they began to find enough complete skeletons to really put together a picture of what dinosaurs look like. And so it's really in Colorado that our understanding of what dinosaurs were like as animals really began to take shape. So the Morrison Formation dates to the Jurassic period and is roughly 150 million years old. And this is kind of the heyday of the age of dinosaurs, when dinosaurs were the dominant land animals. But it turns out that we also know quite a bit now about what was happening much earlier in the age of dinosaurs. And that's some of the discoveries I want to talk about today. First, though, we have to talk just a little bit about dinosaurs. It's kind of a common misconception that any kind of weird extinct animal is a dinosaur, but dinosaurs are actually a very specific group of animals. They are closely related to crocodilians, crocodiles and alligators, and modern day birds are and also the big swimming reptiles of the age of dinosaurs, like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs. These are also not dinosaurs. These are reptiles, but they are a totally separate group of animals. So dinosaurs mostly lived during the Mesozoic Era, which lasted from roughly around 250 to 66 million years ago. And that is the time where they really kind of ruled the earth. Some of the ways that we can distinguish dinosaur fossils from other types of reptiles is by looking at their bones, because dinosaurs have a number of unique features you don't find in other reptiles. And I just want to point out a few of these because we're going to see them a little later in this talk. This is the hip bone of a big meat-eating dinosaur called Allosaurus. And this part here is the hip socket. Okay, this is the thigh bone fitting in the hip socket. And you'll notice a couple features here. There's kind of this big depression on the backside of this part of the bone of the pelvis, and this is called the brevis fossa. And there's also a big kind of crest on the front part of the femur called the anterior trochanter. These are basically places where the big thigh muscles would attach. Other reptiles had these muscles, but in dinosaurs they seem to have been especially prominent, and they had very powerful back legs. And this is one of the ways that we could identify dinosaur fossils. Also, the hip socket in dinosaurs is actually open. Okay, so the bottom of this bone is actually concave, and there's actually a hole here that the the thigh bone would actually fit into. And that's another kind of distinctive feature of dinosaurs. Most reptiles just kind of have a closed hip socket. So we also kind of have to talk about where dinosaurs kind of fit in the history of life, because this is kind of what makes the Colorado discoveries very significant. If we look at the history of land animals, there have been animals living on land for roughly 400 million years, and at different times in Earth history, different groups of big animals have dominated terrestrial ecosystems. And we could these particular times have sometimes been referred to as what are called mega dynasties. So the first of these mega dynasties took place late in what's called the Paleozoic period, and we had these large reptiles running around then. These animals, this big fin-backed animal here, if you've ever played with a dinosaur toy as a kid that wasn't an actual dinosaur, it was likely this thing. This is an animal called Dimetrodon, which, believe it or not, is actually more closely related to mammals than just dinosaurs. But this is one of the first big carnivorous animals to rule the land. And then later these animals went extinct and were replaced by our second big dynasty of animals, which lived before about 251 million years ago. And these animals were even more closely related to mammals. They were very, very mammal-like and included the ancestors of the first mammals. But then, about 251 million years ago, there was a huge mass extinction. Most of you have heard of the extinction that killed the dinosaurs, but this was an even larger extinction called the Permian extinction, and this was the biggest catastrophe in the history of life. By some estimates, it wiped out more than 99% of all life on Earth, and was a tremendous catastrophe. And it's after this enormous extinction that the dinosaurs take over as the dominant land animals. So really, in one way or another, the dinosaurs really owe their dominance during the Mesozoic to this catastrophe. So the period of time we're going to look at today is during what is called and then of course today we have mammals being the ruling animals, and they take over after the dinosaurs go extinct. But today we're going to be focusing on a period of time called the Triassic period, which is the very beginning of the age of dinosaurs. And this is really interesting time because this is when the first dinosaurs appear, and we also have a variety of animals that survived the Permian extinction. So for a while, all these strange animals, the dinosaurs, which are relatively new, and these older animals kind of coexisted with each other, and then the dinosaurs eventually took over. So one thing that me and my colleagues have spent a lot of time trying to understand is exactly how and why this happened. Why did dinosaurs eventually come to rule the Earth? So during this period of time, okay, the continents of the Earth were basically joined together into one big supercontinent called Pangaea, and dinosaurs inhabited this supercontinent. Now, our understanding of how dinosaurs first appeared has changed quite a bit in the last 15 years. It used to be thought that during a period of time called the Middle Triassic, okay, before the true dinosaurs appeared, we had these kind of early dinosaur relatives. And these things are sometimes referred to as dinosaur forms or dinosauromorphs, but we could just kind of call them dinosaur cousins. Okay, these are things which are almost but not quite dinosaurs. They lack a lot of the really distinctive features of dinosaurs. And they are known pretty much exclusively from South America, or at least they used to be thought to be restricted to South America. And then it was thought that true dinosaurs appeared in the late Triassic, okay, after about 230 million years ago, and all three of the major dinosaur groups were around by then. Okay, so we had the theropod dinosaurs, which are the meat-eating dinosaurs. These guys. And then this third group called the Ornithischians. These are most plant-eating dinosaurs belong to this group. So if you're thinking of a groups were thought to be around by the late Triassic, and this is importantly, they were thought to all have a worldwide distribution. In other words, if you wandered all the way around the world during the late Triassic, and at this time you could basically walk from the Arctic Circle down to Antarctica without getting your feet wet, you would basically find all three of these big dinosaur groups everywhere. Okay. Now, it's worth pointing out that the reason why some of these plant-eating dinosaurs were thought to exist in North America was because they were known from teeth. Okay. Now, these fossil teeth, okay, do look a lot like the teeth of plant-eating dinosaurs, and they're fairly common in late Triassic rocks in parts of western North America. So for a long time, they were thought to actually belong to plant-eating dinosaurs. But we didn't actually have any skeletons or bones of plant-eating dinosaurs from the late Triassic in the western United States, which was very peculiar because some of these are fairly large animals. Okay. Now, this picture of early dinosaur origins began to get a bit more complicated late Triassic at the same time as early dinosaurs, but it is something which is almost but not quite a true dinosaur. And it has some dinosaur-like features. Okay, so that little depression on the backside of the hip we talked about, the brevis fossa. It's also got that big crest on the thigh bone, the anterior trochanter. Okay, but it also has some more primitive features. It doesn't have that open hip socket. Okay, the hip socket is closed, and it's got this weird little blocky head of the femur, which is actually pretty distinctive, and that's nothing like what you see in dinosaurs. A lot of other interesting features about this animal. One is it has a kind of a toothless beak. The teeth were actually fused to the jawbone. among other things. So this animal is apparently a little plant-eating animal, or possibly a little omnivore. And the discovery of Silosaurus really prompted a careful reevaluation of the late Triassic dinosaur record from North America, because people said, okay, well, wait a minute, we know we have these early dinosaur relatives surviving into the late Triassic, so maybe some of these things from the late Triassic in North America that people thought were dinosaurs were actually something else. Now, most of these early dinosaur fossils are known from a couple of rock units in the Four Corner states and Texas called the Chinle Formation, the Gotham Group. These rocks were formed by ancient river systems during the early part of the age of dinosaurs. Okay, so basically rivers would flow through this area, deposit layers of sand and mud, and then basically what's happening now is these same sediments are basically being washed away or eroded, okay, and are being exposed. So we can now find the fossils of dinosaurs and other animals that were buried in these sediments. Okay, so when you're looking at these rocks, you're basically looking at a cross section kind of through this ancient environment. As I mentioned, a lot of early dinosaurs were known. So in this big study, published in 2005, a group of my colleagues took a close look at some of these fossils and tried to determine whether or not they were really early dinosaurs or not. And what they found was pretty interesting. They did find that these late Triassic fossils included early meat-eating dinosaurs, so meat-eating dinosaurs were present, but apparently we didn't have any plant-eating dinosaurs at all during the late Triassic. All the bones that we thought were Triassic plant-eating dinosaurs actually are other types of reptiles. A lot of these teeth belong to an animal called the Weltosaurus, which, as it turns out, is actually an animal more closely related to crocodiles, of all things, which is very bizarre. We have quite a bit of the skeleton of Weltosaurus, so that's something you know. But they also found that animals like Silosaurus, okay, occurred at the same time in North America. And also this group here, this is one of those very early dinosaur relatives that was thought to be extinct by this time. It also survived into the late Triassic. Okay, so the point is that in the early part of the age of dinosaurs in the western United States, we had little meat-eating dinosaurs running around with a few types of sort of primitive dinosaur relatives that had survived a lot longer than most people had realized. Now, these animals are mostly known from pretty scrappy remains. Silosaurus from Poland was known from a pretty nice complete skeleton, which showed what it looked like, but most of the North American stuff is known from bits and pieces. But they do have these very distinctive features that you see in early dinosaurs. I'm not going to go over all these, but the point is these seem to be pretty similar animals to Silosaurus. They've got teeth fused to the sockets, they've got those weird hip sockets, brevis fossa, and a bunch of other features. Prior to the material I'm going to talk about from Colorado, there were basically 3 animals known. An animal from New Mexico called Uceolophysis, and then these 2 little jaws here were found from Texas in rocks about the same age. But this is not very complete material, as you can see. We just really have little bits and pieces. Okay. Now, this is a map of what the western United States looked like during the late Triassic. So this is, again, very early in the age of dinosaurs. And you basically, at this time, you had a series of rivers flowing through Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona up to Nevada. And you had a big mountain range, actually a volcanic mountain range, running through Southern California. And you had another little mountain range up here in Colorado. And these are that's what's referred to as the ancestral Rocky Mountains. Now, most of these other Silosaurs that were already known were known from this area, from Arizona and New Mexico, but the stuff I'm going to talk about is from Colorado, and it's from a little area called the Eagle Basin, which was a lot further north than most of this other material, kind of tucked away on the north side of the ancestral Rocky Mountains. Okay. So here's a map of Colorado. Here's Denver. Morrison is located right around here, and the material I'm going to talk about is maybe a couple hours, about 3 hours drive west of Denver along I-70 in this area. And that's where the Eagle Basin is now located. This material was mostly excavated by a colleague of mine named Brian Small, who was actually one of my very earliest mentors in paleontology back when I was in high school. And he has spent about 20 years digging this site, collecting fossils, and I've been out a couple years to help him. But most of this material he collected himself. And these bones are so small and delicate that it's really taken that long to get them cleaned up enough for study. This is what the area looks like. Okay, so the rocks that we've been finding these little early dinosaurs from are these red rocks down at the bottom. This is the Chinle Formation, and these rocks at the upper part of the cliff, those are mostly younger rocks from the age of dinosaurs, including the Morrison Formation. And we've actually found pieces of big dinosaur bones from the Morrison Formation laying around at the base of the cliff here. Okay, and this is just a more technical section showing these rocks. So, sometimes we find these bones in relatively fine-grained sediments like silts and muds, and these include things like little fish, which is what this is, these are little fish scales. Most of the bones, however, come from these gravel beds, and we think that these were actually formed by little gravelly streams. Most dinosaur remains are actually found in ancient river deposits, and this is great because rivers can bury things very rapidly, which is an important thing if you want to be a fossil. The vast majority of all things that die just basically get recycled by nature, and you really have to bury something very rapidly after it dies for it to be preserved as a fossil. So this is good. It's good that if you want to be a fossil. I don't know, it's up to you. But if you want to be a fossil, it's good to die in or near a river. Okay. The downside of that, of course, is that rivers flow and they tend to wash things along. And oftentimes, when dinosaurs are preserved in rivers, you just find little isolated bits and pieces because the skeleton's basically been washed to pieces. And that's how we find many of the bones at the site. Here's this little photograph of the excavation. So these are all volunteers at the Denver Museum, and that's Brian in the background there. And basically, they just very carefully dig for these sediments, collect the bones, wrap them up very carefully, and then take them back to the museum to clean them up and study them. Okay. This is just another one of the animals that we've collected from this area that actually Brian collected. This is a little animal called Stenomite. This thing is actually distantly related to crocodiles, and it has this little heavily armored body and this weird little pointy face. The name Stenomite actually means eagle face, and was probably like a little omnivorous, maybe insect-eating animal, not very closely related to dinosaurs. Now, again, most of this material is pretty scrappy. Here's just one example. So this is the leg bone of one of those very early dinosaur relatives, a little creature called Dromaeomeron. And this animal has this very distinctive hook-shaped thigh bone. So this is the upper leg bone that has this little kind of little curved area underneath the place where it fits into the hip socket. And you can see that in these other two specimens that were previously known. And specifically, it belongs to a species called Dromaeomeron romeri that was previously known from Texas, New Mexico. Okay. We also have the remains of little meat-eating dinosaurs from the site, mostly bits and pieces. And these probably belong to an animal called Coelophysis, which is a little carnivorous dinosaur. And just all these different features here, these are all features that are distinctive of dinosaurs and specifically of Coelophysis, which is how we were able to identify it. But the animal I mostly want to talk about is this guy. This is a new species called Kwanasaurus williamparkeri. The name Kwanasaurus is actually named for the nearby town of Eagle. Kwana is actually the Native American word for eagle. And then William Parker is one of my colleagues who works in Arizona, who's done a lot of really important work on these animals. So Kwanasaurus is, again, mostly known from little isolated bones. The bones are mostly collected individually. But we can tell from these bones that we have something which is related to Silosaurus, but still a different species. And I just want to show you photographs of a few of these bones. So here's the upper jaw bone. So this is a bone called the maxilla, which is in the upper jaw. We've got both big and small individuals. So if you look at the size difference between these, we've actually got quite a range of sizes of individuals. Here's the lower jaw, or dentary. Here's the hip bone. Okay, and there's actually quite a few thigh bones. This is only a small sample of all the material we got. We actually have quite a few bones. But again, we have all the really distinctive features of Silosaurus, so we know this thing is related to Silosaurus. Okay, and it also has a number of really kind of unique features of its own. For example, on the hip bone, it's got this really long process kind of sticking off the front of the hip bone, and that's very different from what we see in other Silosaurids. Okay. All right, so here's the skull. of Silosaurus. And here for comparison are some lower jaws of other Silosaurus-like animals. So these are the lower jaws of those little early dinosaur relatives. Many of them you can see it has the same kind of toothless beak sticking off the front of the jaw. They also have the teeth fused to the sockets, fused to the jaw, which is, again, something else you mostly just see in Silosaurus and a few of these other animals. But the upper jaw is what is really distinctive, and this is what allows us to tell the reason why we think this is basically a new species. The upper jaw is very, very massive. If you look at how slender the upper jaw is in previously known Silosaurids, in Kwanasaurus it's very robust. It's this big, huge, heavy element. And if you kind of flip them around and look on the inner surface of this jaw, okay, this is the inside. In Kwanasaurus, there's this big, huge flange of bone that kind of sticks off the inner surface of the bone, and you don't see that in other Silosaurids. You see features like this in animals that have a very powerful bite, because basically what they're doing is they're developing a big, huge, heavy jawbone and then attaching it firmly to other bones in the skull to really kind of reinforce the head. So this suggests that Kwanasaurus, whatever it was doing, was tackling fairly tough food. But the interesting thing is the teeth of Kwanasaurus, which again look a lot like the teeth of little plant-eating dinosaurs. Kwanasaurus is not a dinosaur, it's a close relative, but it seems to have been eating the same kinds of things that early plant-eating dinosaurs were eating. So, what this is showing you, this horribly complicated looking diagram, this is basically a family tree of dinosaurs and their relatives. One thing you do when you describe a new species is you do what is called a cladistic analysis, and basically this is how we figure out how different animals are related to each other. And the only reason I'm showing you this is because in this analysis we found that within the Silosaurids, this animal here, an animal called Luasuchus, is one of the earliest and most primitive members of the group. Okay, and then you've got a couple of other slightly more advanced species, including Silosaurus, and then most other Silosaurs belong to this kind of very advanced branch further up the tree. The reason this is interesting is when you look at the teeth of these animals. Okay, this is one of the teeth of Luasuchus, that really primitive Silosaurid. And this is very, very similar to the teeth of little meat-eating dinosaurs. And also modern day, like meat-eating lizards have teeth very similar to this. Basically, it is curved. It's got all these little bumps running along the edge called serrations, and these are for basically cutting meat. So it's kind of like a little steak knife that it can use to kind of slice through meat. And this suggests that our early Silosaurs were basically little meat-eaters. Okay? But if you look at those slightly more advanced Silosaurids, they have very different looking teeth that are more peggy. Okay, they're just basically kind of pointy. They do have little bumps along the edge, but they're not very pronounced. This is the kind of teeth you see in animals like armadillos and other types of, well, not armadillos, but other various types of insect-eating animals, because this is a really good tooth design for basically puncturing and eating invertebrates and insects and things like that. Okay, and then if you look at most other Silosaurids, including Kwanasaurus, they have these very distinctive looking sort of leaf-shaped teeth, and that's what the word pholodont means. It literally means leaf tooth, with these big, huge bumps along the edge. And these are pretty much identical to the teeth of basically modern-day plant-eating reptiles like iguanas. This is a really good tooth design for like shredding leaves. Okay, so these Silosaurids seem to be more like specialized plant-eaters. And that is kind of consistent with the big, huge, heavy, massive skull of Kwanasaurus, because iguanas, when you compare them to other types of lizards, have very solidly built skulls. Leaves are actually pretty tough to chew. They're a fairly tough, fibrous type of food, and in order to be a specialist plant eater, you have to have pretty massively built teeth and lower jaws. And certainly, if you think about like the big, huge teeth of a horse or a rhino, which are these big, huge, massive teeth with big grinding surfaces, and you compare them to something like a dog, which has these, relatively small pointy teeth, plant-eating animals have to have pretty massive grinding teeth, whereas meat is actually, relatively easy to cut through. Okay, so all this is showing you is that same family tree that I showed you previously, but this time it's just set up against a time scale, so it shows when the different species live. And all I'm showing you here is that, again, that these earliest, more primitive silosaurids had these more flesh-eating teeth, the slightly more advanced ones had more conical teeth, and then the really advanced ones had these distinctive plant-eating looking teeth. And this is a really interesting pattern because this has also been seen in early dinosaurs. The earliest dinosaurs seem to evolve in specialized meat eaters, and then later on, many of them developed teeth that were more suitable for eating insects, and then some of them became more specialist plant eaters. So the picture seems to be appearing that if you are a meat-eating reptile and you want to evolve to a plant eater, you kind of have to pass through this phase where you're The final thing about silosaurs I want to mention is where we find them. And the interesting thing about silosaurids is that we pretty much have found them globally. This shows you all the places in the world where we find silosaurids, all the way from the southern hemisphere well up into the northern hemisphere. And if you compare this to where you find plant-eating dinosaurs during the late Triassic, okay, they have a slightly more restricted distribution. You find a lot of plant-eating dinosaurs in the southern hemisphere, and you find them up north, but you don't really find them along the equator. During the Triassic, North America was actually sitting a lot further south than it is now, and we have all these silosaurids living in what was then kind of a tropical environment, but interestingly, no plant-eating dinosaurs. Okay. So it appears that early in the history of dinosaurs, there were actually some types of animals that were more adaptable and able to survive, a wider variety of conditions than the earliest plant-eating dinosaurs. And it's only after silosaurids go extinct that plant-eating dinosaurs really kind of take over the earth. So we're beginning to develop a really interesting and complex picture of what's happening very early in the age of dinosaurs. This is something that we're becoming very excited about. Because our picture of how and why and when dinosaurs became the dominant land animals is becoming quite complicated. So these are just my conclusions. So Kwanasaurus basically becomes the fourth species of silosaurid we know from North America. It shows that silosaurs lived a lot further north in North America than we previously realized. And also it tells us something about how plant eating seems to evolve in a variety of reptiles. Kwanasaurus, we think, basically represents the most specialized silosaurid for eating plants. Okay. So that's my talk, and I hope you enjoyed it.
So, is anybody have any questions? Please ask. Yeah.
The MA, I missed what that was abbreviation for.
Oh, MA. Okay, so that's millions of years ago.
Okay.
So 275 MA would be 275 million years ago.
Okay. Some more questions? Okay, go ahead.
So you got the little gobbler turkey thing?
Yeah, so that's pure artistic license. So when you're reconstructing extinct animals, you can figure out quite a bit about the muscles and how they're arranged because we have the same types of muscles in modern day reptiles, and you can actually see where the same muscles would attach on the skeleton of something like a dinosaur. So we're pretty confident about the general outline of the body. But I just kind of threw that on the drawing just because modern day birds and reptiles have weird structures like that. So, that's pure speculation, but I'd be really surprised if extinct dinosaurs and other types of extinct reptiles didn't have things like that. Look at a rooster or a turkey and, those weird things hanging off their faces. You would not predict that by looking at their skeletons.
What about the colors?
The color is also speculative. But a lot of types of reptiles and birds will have kind of elaborate colors around their head and neck. So,
what is the difference between what is Jurassic? What is Triassic and Jurassic and all that? What does that mean?
Those are periods of time. Okay, so dinosaurs lived in a big interval of time called the Mesozoic Era.
I have never seen one of those movies, by the way.
Okay, and the Mesozoic
This is
is
the most I've ever seen anything about dinosaurs except for my nieces and nephews playing with it.
But go back to that time scale. So the Mesozoic lasted from about 250 to 66 million years ago, and it's the Jurassic and Triassic are basically shorter periods of time that it's kind of divided up into. Okay, so the Triassic period, so this is the Mesozoic, this is the age of dinosaurs right here, and it lasted between 251 million years ago and 66 million years ago, and then the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, these are subdivisions of time. So, you know, the 20th century, you can divide it into the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, it's the same basic idea. So the Jurassic and Cretaceous is when dinosaurs were the big land animals, and the Triassic is when they were just starting out.
What kind of people were back then?
There were no people during the age of dinosaurs. The first people that we see evidence of fossils of come from the end of the age of mammals. Humans and their close relatives have really only been around for maybe 4 or 5 million years. No one's ever, you may have heard that people have found human skeletons with dinosaurs, but as far as we know, that's nonsense.
Okay. Any more questions?
This animal is having more bird-like features. How close was this animal to having that bird-like features?
Well, all dinosaurs and also some of these animals have a few sort of bird-like features. If you look especially at the backbone, there's a lot of little pockets and holes in the backbone of these animals. You see those in modern birds too, and those are basically where like little air sacs connected to the lungs would kind of invade the bones, and those kind of help cool the body and also lighten the body. So all these animals would have a few of those. But silosaurids are pretty primitive as far as dinosaurs go, and they certainly don't have nearly as many bird-like features as a lot of meat-eating dinosaurs do. So they've got a couple, but not a huge number.
When was the Kwanasaurus discovered?
Well, the material is that they've been digging up the bones for about 20 years, but it's only been about 3 or 4 years that we knew that we had a new species and began working on the paper.
Okay.
What caused the Permian extinction?
That's a good question. But one thing that was happening about the time is that there seems to have been these really massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia. These are what are called the Siberian traps, and these seem to have been these enormous lava flows that covered a huge area of Asia. And it's thought that basically these huge volcanic eruptions were introducing basically tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and possibly poisoning the atmosphere and also, causing global warming, basically. And that's the best explanation that's been found probably so far for the Permian extinction. Famously, the dinosaur extinction, we know there was a big asteroid impact that took place at the same time, but interestingly, there were also massive volcanic eruptions happening about the same time, this time in India. So it's possible that those were also connected in some way to the extinction. To date, we don't have any good evidence of a big asteroid impact happening with the Permian extinction. So the volcanic eruptions are still the best explanation for that.
Okay. Some more questions? Go.
Yeah, I'm curious what makes you determine a dinosaur as a full species? Like,
If
what
it's a new
determine,
species?
What makes up that?
Basically, if it has unique features that you haven't seen in any other closely related species. So in the case of Kwanasaurus, it's got features that told us it was a silosaurid. It was related to animals like that, but then it had a number of features that we'd never seen in the other silosaurid species, and that.
So, what do y'all go through to determine the age of the skeleton? Do y'all just go by the species of the bone, or do y'all go by how you do it?
The main method for getting dates for rocks, and when we say something is millions of years old, is something called radiometric dating. And it's not, some people will tell you that it's something called radiocarbon dating. It's not the same thing. When you date dinosaurs, this is a slightly different method of dating than radiocarbon dating. But basically what you're dating are minerals being produced by volcanic eruptions. And the way this works is these minerals will contain a type of element, an isotope, that will break down over time into a different isotope. Okay, so we know how fast that breakdown occurs. So what we can do is take this mineral, measure the amount of the original isotope and the amount of the stuff it's broken down to, and we can calculate how long the minerals existed. And that's, in a nutshell, the method of how this works. So during the age of dinosaurs, you had volcanic eruptions just like today. And when you had one of these eruptions, it would produce, lots of volcanic ash, and these would end up getting buried in the same sediments that you find the dinosaurs in. So that's how we can use those minerals to actually get dates for the animals.
Okay, go ahead.
So why do you think they
So the big plant-eating dinosaurs at the time, it's possible. These big, long-necked, long-tailed plant-eating dinosaurs do not seem to have liked wet tropical climates. You find them almost entirely in areas that are relatively dry. You don't see them move. Basically, one reason you don't see them move into North America until the Jurassic period, after the Triassic, is because the climate around here gets notably drier. Okay, so during the Triassic period, it's very wet and swampy, and then in the Jurassic, so the climate it seems to have some climate control. They just don't like swampy conditions for some reason.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Are you still digging in Colorado, or are you about to location?
Most of the digging I'm doing now is actually in Arizona and Utah. So I dig near Petrified Forest National Park in northern Arizona. We've got a bone site there that have a bunch of animals that are actually kind of related to Stenomyini, those kind of armored crocodile-like animals. And then I look for fossils also in southern Utah, in what's called, what used to be called Grant Staircase Escalante National Monument.
Okay. Any other? Okay.
Like the way the dinosaur looks, like in terms of having fur on it or feathers, is that still just speculation, or is that like you guys know?
No. Very rarely you will find a specimen of an extinct animal that actually has traces of the skin, fur, and feathers preserved. And it's not the actual skin or feathers. What it is basically a dark colored stain that's left behind. But under very special conditions, you can get preserved. Usually this happens when the animal dies either in like a shallow sea or a lake, where the bottom of the lake is very poor in oxygen. So the animal basically dies and sinks to the bottom, and then because there's not much oxygen down there, it rots very, very slowly. And also there's not many things living down there that will like eat it. So basically it decays incredibly slowly, it gets a chance to be buried, and the slow decay allows those features to kind of be preserved. So we know that meat-eating dinosaurs had feathers, mostly because of a particular site in China. And we also know from the same site that other types of dinosaurs had these sort of hair-like and feather-like features as well. So when I showed you the drawing with the Kwanasaurus having those, that is not something we know for sure, but it's a reasonable speculation. Interestingly, if we look at the pterosaurs, or the flying reptiles, okay, these are also not dinosaurs. Okay, so things are sometimes referred to as pterodactyls. So these guys here, so the dinosaurs are up here, pterosaurs are closely related, and some fossils of pterosaurs also have these kind of hair-like structures growing off their body. And Kwanasaurus is actually a lot more closely related to dinosaurs than pterosaurs are. So if pterosaurs have these kind of hair-like structures and dinosaurs had them, then it's very likely that silosaurs did too. So we don't have any direct evidence of that yet, but it's a reasonable speculation. Yep.
Dr. Martz, if a student is interested in a career in paleontology, what would they need to do? What would they need to major in? Would it need to be science, biology? What would be the correct field?
Well, the paleontology is a huge field, and there's some that are more kind of biology, interested in sort of the biology side of dinosaurs, and some that are more interested in the geology side of dinosaurs. You would definitely want to take classes in both biology and geology, but there's usually, you want to get either a biology degree or a geology degree or both, because the vast majority of paleontologists work at the geology departments of universities, but there's also quite a few that are actually medical certified doctors. A lot of paleontologists that study the anatomy of dinosaurs actually do part-time teaching in anatomy in medical schools. So it varies. It depends on what it is about dinosaurs you find interesting. Do you want to study the environments they lived in, or do you want to study their anatomy? But you want to do biology or geology.
How compatible are the dinosaur remains from various continents in the same time zone?
That's interesting because it kind of varies a bit. It used to be kind of assumed, because all these continents were joined together into one big landmass, that you would have basically identical animals living on all these continents because they're not separated from each other. And interestingly, a little bit before the early dinosaurs, that seems to have been true. If you look at like the Permian and the earlier Triassic animals that lived right before the dinosaurs, you do find pretty much the same species living on what would later become separate continents. And when you think about how different the animals of South America, Africa, and Australia are today, that's pretty remarkable. But interestingly, by the time the dinosaurs appeared in the late Triassic, we seem to have a lot more variation. And really, all the different regions of the world where we found fossils in the late Triassic, many of them will have the same animals in common, but in sort of different combinations. Okay, so like in North America, we don't have plant-eating dinosaurs, but we've got these big kind of crocodile-like animals called phytosaurs. If you go to India, you find phytosaurs and plant-eating dinosaurs, and if you go to Europe, you find phytosaurs, plant-eating dinosaurs, and these other types of animals. So there's a lot of interesting diversity and variation from place to place all across the world during the late Triassic, and that's one of the things we're trying to understand is why that is.
Question? All right. Go ahead.
So if the dinosaurs got extinct, then how did the crocodiles survive?
That's a really good question. When the dinosaurs were killed off 66 million years ago, that extinction destroyed most big animals, not just on land but in the oceans. And crocodiles are really kind of stand out as being one of the few big animals that survived. Most of the animals that survived on land were little things, little mammals, little birds, things like that. And crocodiles are one of the few big survivors, and a few other types of big reptiles too. Why that isn't entirely clear. One possibility, so one of the things that's thought to have happened in this extinction is that when you have this enormous asteroid impact, what it basically does is the impact blows a bunch of dirt up in the atmosphere and blocks out the sun, and that would basically largely destroy plant life. And if you kill the plants, you kill plant-eating animals. If you kill plant-eating animals, you kill meat-eating animals. And so this is possibly thought to be involved with how the dinosaurs went extinct. But crocodiles and other big reptiles like snakes, they have relatively slow metabolisms. And in some cases, they can go literally for a year without eating if they get a good meal once in a while. So that could be something that helped them survive, the shortage of food, the extinction.
Okay, here you go.
So if there wasn't a mass extinction 66 million years ago, man wouldn't have been here at all.
Probably not, no. Because at the time of the dinosaurs, pretty much all mammals were these relatively small things. And pretty much for the whole age of dinosaurs, mammals never got bigger than about the size of a cat. So the dinosaurs were sort of, I guess, keeping us in our place during the age of dinosaurs. So yeah, if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct, they might still be ruling the earth now.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, we have another one. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
So the word dinosaur is Latin for fearfully great reptile. And the name was coined by an English scientist named Richard Owen back in 1841 because he could tell these things were reptiles and that they were enormous compared to modern day reptiles. So we call them fearfully great reptiles, or sometimes people translate that as terrible lizard. But that's what the word means.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience about whether they can be considered meat eaters. I mean, these relatives, or these are plant eaters? The ones
I talked about today?
Yeah.
Well, the new species I described is probably a plant eater. But other members of the group seem to have been maybe meat eaters or omnivores, possibly eating a variety of stuff.
Right, and then we have a question. Okay, Mike. Okay.
I'm still not clear. When does something become a dinosaur versus not dinosaur?
Okay, so to be a true dinosaur, okay, you got to have basically a variety of features of the skeleton. So some of those we see in silosaurids, okay, but true dinosaurs also have that open hip socket. Okay, so again, true dinosaurs have this open hip socket. They've got all these muscle scars, some of which you find in silosaurids. They also have on the arm bone, they've got this very long crest called the delta pectoral crest, which is a big muscle attachment. Basically, it's just this big long list of features of the skeleton that are kind of distinctive to dinosaurs. And we find some of them in these early dinosaur relatives, and some of them we don't. But the first time we see animals that have all of these is during the late Triassic.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, we have another one. Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's literally hundreds of new fossil species named every year, including like dozens of dinosaurs. So yeah, people are constantly finding new fossils.
Okay. I have a quick question. Your talk, there was a sort of evolution from meat eating to bug eating to plant eating. It seems like, would be more efficient to eat meat, you get more calories than eating plants. Eating a lot of plants, it doesn't seem like it's progressive direction.
It's not as nutritious. But in an ecosystem, if there is a food resource available that no one else is eating, then it's kind of advantageous to exploit it. Because if there's lots of competition for eating meat, but nobody's eating the plants, then that entire food resource is yours. To kind of give you a modern day example, for example, like the modern day giant panda, it specializes on eating bamboo. Okay, and that's in some ways not so good for the giant panda, because it means if anything happens to the bamboo supply, the giant panda dies. But it also means that it doesn't have to share that food with anybody else. It's got the whole thing to itself. And one thing that you see happening right after big mass extinctions, you see this after the dinosaurs go extinct, after the Permian extinction also, is that you see a number of meat-eating animals basically evolving into new types of plant eaters, because most of the plant eaters got killed off in the extinction. So we always have these big, what are called evolutionary radiations, where all the species got wiped out of the extinction basically get replaced, and many of the plant-eating forms seem to basically be evolving from meat eaters. So that happens in the Triassic, and it happens also in the age of mammals.
Okay, so just another one. So the lizards that of today, they will not be directly related to dinosaurs.
No, lizards are a separate group of reptiles.
I see. So the birds, chicken would be more closely related.
As weird as that sounds, yes, a chicken would be closer to Tyrannosaurus rex than a lizard would. And if you look at the skeleton of a chicken and you compare it to like a meat-eating dinosaur and then a crocodile, you'll see it actually looks more like something like Velociraptor than it does to a crocodile, as strange as that sounds. So yeah, chickens are a lot scarier than you might think.
Okay, any more questions? I guess we just think a small gift from us. So thanks again for a great lecture. If you have a few questions and would like to talk to the speaker, you're welcome to stop by. Thanks for coming.